Okay, let's talk about the Coral Sea. That's known as the jewel in the crown of the Australian marine environment. What recommendations have you made to keep it that way?
Well, we got a lot of representation from stakeholders about the Coral Sea. Obviously, there were a lot of concern about the way in which the original configuration was impacting on things like the charter boat industry and some of the commercial fishers. There was also a lot of dissatisfaction expressed in the scientific community about the level of protection of some of the iconic environments within the Coral Sea.
Was there not enough protection? Is that what they were arguing?
They were arguing that there wasn't enough protection of particular components within the Coral Sea, and fortunately we've been able to address that quite explicitly. So we've provided far greater protection of the coral reefs within the Coral Sea, while at the same time allowing a greater access to some of the pelagic fisheries, the fisheries that operate in the upper parts of the water column. So we've again been able to balance what are seemingly competing interests in the Coral Sea and get a better conservation outcome and get a better socio-economic outcome.
So how have you been able to better balance all those interests?
Well, we've been able to what we've done is we've recommended protection for a number of southern coral reefs within the system, that protection didn't exist in the original proclamation. We've also been, at the same time, provided access, as I said, to some of the pelagic fisheries, like the tuna fishery, in areas where they had been excluded. So by giving and taking, getting a better conservation outcome in some of the iconic environments like the coral reef, and giving a little bit away in terms of some of the pelagic areas. But overall, the size of the reserve hasn't changed, obviously. So the entire Coral Sea is protected within a reserve system. But the way in which the multiple uses are managed has been quite specifically addressed.
And what about from the conservation side of the consultation? Will the conservationists be happy with what you've done?
Well, I hope so, because I don't think the conservationists should have been happy with what they got first time round. As I said, there was definitely room to improve the protection of coral reefs, which we've done. There was definitely an opportunity to improve the relationship between the Commonwealth Reserve and the Great Barrier Reef Marine Reserve, and we've done that. And there was an opportunity to change zoning boundaries so that it took the heat out of some of the impacts on sustainable fisheries. And here we've got to recognise that those fisheries that we're talking about, like the eastern tuna fishery, are Marine Stewardship Council accredited fisheries. So they are seen to be operating against the highest standards of sustainability. And so, you know, it's a win-win to have sustainable fishing in the context of really good conservation outcomes.
And Bob, what was the scientific review of all the Coral Sea environments? How extensive was that? And how much information did you have to work with?
Well, you'd never have enough, but we had what was available. And as Colin said, the outstanding issue was a number of these offshore but quite substantial reefs that just didn't make it in the previous round. And so one of the messages is that although there's been some adjustments in terms of the marine national parks, the areas which are protected, particularly the sensitive areas, that's a good outcome for conservation. And so there's a reasonably sound scientific basis. I mean, it's never perfect, but there's a sound scientific basis to what has been done.
So, Peter, what is allowed then in those zones?
Can I just follow up on that first, though? We did benefit from some recent survey work that had been done in the Coral Sea. The Reef Life Survey teams had been through and gave us a lot more information about the importance of the coral reefs in the Coral Sea. So that was very useful information for us. So there was quite a bit of new information which we drew on to help us with the zoning decisions.
Yeah.
So what was some of the new information? Were there things about the reefs that you hadn't known before, or
Some of it, the degree of connectivity and importance for the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park, their connectivity to the more of the Central Pacific as well. So the if you like, the biogeography of fishes. More is now known about how the various reef systems across the Pacific connect and their relationships, and that was important to us. So they're somewhat distinctive in the Coral Sea. The oceanic reefs, they're deep, they occur in deep waters, not close to the coast, and so they're very significant in their own right. But they bear an important relationship to the Great Barrier Reef, and so we paid a lot of attention to that. And I think we've complemented the zoning in the Great Barrier Reef to a much greater extent than was the case before.
So let's talk about what changes there will be to commercial fishing in the Coral Sea and any recreational fishing and game fishing.
So we've been able to accommodate game fishing by allowing access to areas that have had historical importance and that are critical to their operations. So in terms of how they use those areas, because they're very far offshore, so they sort of depart from Cairns and then they have to travel 100 kilometres before they get anywhere where they can start fishing. And so we've been able to look at the way in which they operate their fishing and provide access to certain areas. But by the same token, working with them, they've been able to identify to us areas that they are quite happy to see remaining in green zones. So we're talking about very vast reefs. So we've been able to allow access to certain parts of the reef and have other parts of the reef contained within a marine national park or a green zone. So there is that complementarity in the way in which these areas are used. Same goes for commercial hand collecting and aquarium fisheries. We've been able to listen to the way in which they operate their fisheries and find a way in which we can accommodate some fishing, which is sustainable in terms of the fishing method, as well as getting good conservation outcomes. And that's been done through consultation. We've been listening to both sides, and there is some trade-off, but we think that both sides are going to be reasonably happy with the outcome. In terms of the pelagic fisheries, the longline fisheries, the fisheries that occur in the water column, it's very important to note that the whole of the Coral Sea, the benthos, the bottom, the sea bottom, is being protected, except for a very small special purpose area where trawling can take place. So the vast majority of the Coral Sea Marine Reserve is a habitat protection zone, which offers a very high level of protection against fishing methods that can and are perceived to be fairly damaging to the environment. But we've allowed the important pelagic fisheries to exist within that conservation framework.
Yeah, I think one of the things we've done, as Colin says, very carefully in listening to the stakeholders and their concerns and interests is move away from some of the multiple use zones where there was an array of activities possible to a greater use of special purpose zones, which are more targeted at the particular economic activities and only them. So we've focused a lot more in the zoning that we're recommending to allow some things and not others, and that's really been driven both by those specific interests that want to continue, and also then by getting a better conservation outcome by having a slightly more restrictive set of activities allowed.